An advice letter is the highest stakes document you send a client. It's the document they read when they're worried, uncertain, or about to make a decision that affects their business, their property, or their life. And most Claude advice letters read like Claude wrote them. Not because the information is wrong, not because the legal position is inaccurate, because without a specific brief, Claude produces advice that is thorough and impersonal, a document that covers the legal position correctly and doesn't speak to this specific client, in this specific situation, with this specific decision in front of them. This episode covers the complete workflow, the 6-field brief that calibrates the letter before Claude starts drafting, the copy-ready first draft prompt, 3 refinement reads that each catch something different, 5 advice letter types with the specific register instruction for each, and the verification standard before anything goes to the client. Every prompt from this episode is in the free advice letter workflow PDF, linked in the description. Before the prompts, it's worth being clear about why advice letters need a different approach from other Claude tasks. The client is making a decision based on what you send them. That's what makes this document different from a contract review, a file note, or a matter summary. Those documents are internal or procedural. The advice letter is the document the client reads, acts on, and holds you accountable for. This changes the stakes of getting the brief wrong. A contract review with a vague brief produces a generic review. You can identify that and run a better brief. An advice letter with a vague brief produces a generic advice letter that goes to a client who then makes a decision based on it. The gap between a letter that lands and one that doesn't isn't just a quality gap. It's the gap between a client who acts confidently and one who calls back confused, or worse, acts on something they misunderstood. 2 things to be clear about before we go further. First, Claude expresses the legal position and recommendation you provide in the brief. It doesn't discover the advice. If you haven't decided what the recommendation is, brief Claude after you have. Don't use Claude to decide the advice and then send the output. Use Claude to express the advice you've already determined in a way this specific client can understand and act on. Second, the professional accountability for what the letter says sits with you. Claude produces the expression. You own the advice. 6 fields before you run the prompt. All 6. Not most of them. Field 1. Who the client is. Not their name, their legal sophistication, their background, and what they do or don't understand about this area of law. Claude adjusts the level of explanation, the assumed prior knowledge, and the register based on this field. A first-time buyer gets a different letter from a sophisticated commercial client, even if the legal position is identical. Field 2. The legal position. What the law is and what it means for this client. This is the substance Claude is expressing, not discovering. You provide the legal position based on your research and judgment. Claude puts it into language the client can understand. Field 3. The recommendation. What you are advising the client to do and why. Be specific. If the recommendation is conditional, we recommend X if Y, but Z if W, state that clearly. Claude will express it accordingly. Field 4. The decision they face. What specifically does the client need to decide or do as a result of receiving this advice? A letter without a clear action or decision point leaves the client uncertain about what comes next. This field is what gives the letter its direction. Field 5. The risk of not acting. What happens if the client doesn't follow the advice, misses a deadline, or makes the wrong decision? This is what gives the advice letter its weight. Without it, Claude produces advice without consequence, and clients don't act on advice that feels consequence-free. Field 6. The toward and away from instruction. Moving toward, confident, clear, and actionable. Moving away from, so hedged the client can't make a decision, or so technical they can't understand the recommendation. We'll cover the specific toward away from instruction for each of the 5 advice letter types on the next slide but one. With all 6 fields complete, run this prompt. It's copy ready. Fill in the brackets and paste it directly. Write a client advice letter for a matter type. My client is who they are, legal sophistication, background, what they understand about this area. The legal position is, what the law is, and what it means for this client. My recommendation is what you are advising them to do and why. As a result of this letter, my client needs to the specific decision or action, the risk if they do not act, consequence of inaction or wrong decision. Moving toward confident, clear, and actionable. The client should know exactly what we are recommending and why. Moving away from so hedged the client cannot make a decision, or so technical they cannot understand the recommendation. Flag anything uncertain with verify. The output from this prompt is a first draft, not the final letter. The 3 refinement reads come next, and they will find things in the first draft that shouldn't go to the client. 3 reads, in order. Each one catches what the others miss. The accuracy read. Does the letter accurately reflect the legal position and recommendation you provided in the brief? Ask Claude. Check this letter against the brief I gave you. Does the legal position accurately reflect what I told you? Does the recommendation match what I advised? Flag any divergence. Claude can drift from the brief, softening a recommendation you stated firmly, adding qualifications you didn't ask for, or characterizing the position slightly differently. The accuracy read catches these before the letter goes anywhere. The clarity read. Does the letter communicate clearly to this specific client? Ask Claude. Read this letter as my client. Brief description. What would they not understand? What legal jargon survived the draft? Does the recommendation come through clearly? What would they still be uncertain about after reading this? This catches the terminology you forgot to explain, the sentence that makes sense to a lawyer but not to a first-time buyer, and the recommendation that's clear to you but ambiguous to the client. The client read. Does the letter feel like it was written for this person? Ask Claude. Read this as my client. Does it feel like their lawyer wrote this specifically for them, or like a professional letter that could have been sent to anyone in a similar situation? What would make them feel more seen? This is the most subjective read. It catches the output that is technically correct and impersonal, the letter that's accurate but doesn't acknowledge what this situation means to this person. Run all 3, in order, before the letter goes anywhere. The base prompt and brief structure works for any advice letter. The toward/away from instruction in field 6 adjusts for each letter type. Straightforward advice. Moving toward, clear and confident. Moving away from, overqualified to the point of paralysis. The client needs to understand the position and act on it. Bad news advice. Moving toward, honest and direct, acknowledging the impact before the explanation. Moving away from, burying the news in procedural language or being defensive about it. The client needs to hear the news, understand it, and know what happens next. Risk assessment. Moving toward, balanced and specific about the nature of each risk. Moving away from, catastrophizing or minimizing. Both obscure the actual risk picture. The client needs to understand what the risks actually are, not how worried to be. Recommendation. Moving toward, clear recommendation with the reasoning the client can follow and act on. Moving away from, presenting options without a recommendation. The client came to you for advice, not a menu. Give them the recommendation. Update with advice. Moving toward, update and advice in the right order. What happened, what it means, what they need to do. Moving away from, update without advice, or advice without context. Both are incomplete. All 5 templates, with the specific brief structure for each type, are in the free PDF in the description. The verification standard for advice letters is higher than for any other document you produce with Claude. Here is why. A contract review with an error can be caught before the red line goes back. A file note with an error stays on the file. An advice letter with an error goes to a client who then makes a decision based on it. The professional consequence of an error in an advice letter is categorically different from an error in most other documents. 4 checks before the letter goes to the client. The accuracy check. Does the letter accurately reflect the legal position and recommendation you provided in the brief? If Claude drifted from the brief, softened the recommendation, added a caveat you didn't ask for, characterized the risk differently, fix it before it goes out. Every verify flag cleared. Every flag in an advice letter is a mandatory task. A client who acts on an unverified proposition in an advice letter is a professional liability risk. Clear every flag against a primary source before the letter goes anywhere. The recommendation check. The recommendation in the letter must match the recommendation you actually intend to make. Claude occasionally expresses a recommendation less confidently than you briefed it, or adds qualifications that change the character of the advice. If the recommendation in the letter doesn't match your professional judgment, fix it. The professional judgment check. Apply your judgment to the complete letter before it goes to the client. Does it say what you intended to say? Would you be comfortable defending every proposition in it? If not, it doesn't go out. 6 fields. 1 prompt. 3 reads. 1 check before it goes out. That's the complete advice letter workflow. The free advice letter workflow PDF, every prompt from this episode, the 5 letter type templates with the specific register instructions, and the complete verification checklist is in the description. For the complete client communication system, the client register for briefing Claude on who the client is, the seeding framework for building client context into a matter project, and the full refinement read system, the client-facing Claude system is coming soon to claudeforlawyers.gumroad.com. That's the episode. See you in the next one.